video is sponsored by War Thunder. Yeah, we sold out, guys. Times are hard. Underneath this roundabout in North Oak, way below Cyberpunk's map, you can find this huge grey square. Inside of this square are actually another two smaller squares, and inside of these squares, no, I'm just kidding, but this is just one example of weird, unseen aspects of Cyberpunk 2077 that are usually invisible to the everyday player. Did you know that there's a gigantic, unfinished shopping complex in city centre? It's actually so obviously unfinished, even the developers named it accordingly. Crunch Plaza is the most obvious example of Cyberpunk 2077's troubled development. Most of this place is actually organically explorable by accessing this unassuming chessboard inspired corner. A solitary lift will take you up to floors 3 and 4. Floor 3 is just a long walkway that will take you around various tunnels of classical Night City verticality, whilst level 4 reveals a shockingly empty space. Above us sits Crunch Plaza's only point of interest, a functional gun store. This shop sits alone in an otherwise featureless environment and doesn't seem to be particularly unique. But if we were to clip behind this locked door, we can find something very strange. This is an entirely cut firing range which exists at all times just out of sight. It's completely finished and mostly functional, but has never seen the light of day, forever encased in its metallic tomb. But the gun shop marks the end of Crunch Plaza's functionality, because further on is something you don't see too often in Night City. It's nothing. Nothing is here. There is nothing going on. No props, no lighting, no NPCs, no distinguishable features or innate purpose. There is quite literally nothing. It's an uneasy sight to behold. It's as if the developers packed up one day and just never came back. I don't know about you, but I can almost feel a weight in the air, like the mismanagement and pressing deadlines still hang in the walls like some kind of trapped spirit. Crunch Plaza is a memorial to the unfulfilled plans and ambitions that these developers so clearly wanted to deliver. It's a big, empty proof of concept, and rather than be destroyed or replaced, Crunch Plaza was eternalized by the very people who helped build it as a gigantic middle finger to those responsible for its premature death. Jesus fucking Christ, should we lighten the mood a bit? It's so depressing for no reason. Okay, so running parallel to Crunch Plaza is another gigantic vertical play space that is never once seen by the player. Two glass walkways stretch above this busy highway and eventually link up with this open concrete space. We can instantly notice a usable lift on this left side, which will just periodically show itself as if to invite us in. We can sort of use this thing with a little bit of finesse and eventually drop down a level into this wide open space. I'm in a wide open. At first glance, this looks to be an empty car park, devoid of any real detail except this single yellow lift. There's a ramp which can be followed down, leading us to another empty level and then eventually to this closed off gate. Beyond this gate is actually the main road which we saw from above, and there's even this nicely detailed entrance round the back of this building which seems to be an unmarked pedestrian access point. Although there's no real branding here or actually any purpose whatsoever, we do have these RGB floors and even two hackable speakers. This kind of implies that the building itself is maybe not a car park and perhaps tied to music, which is a very odd coincidence considering that right above us is a famous music shop which was completely removed from the game. This is Metal Heaven, a renowned music shop which existed within Cyberpunk 2020. The store was famous for having 3 floors, featuring an extensive disc market where it was rumoured that employees could find any recorded music ever made. There was a small recording studio that was rented out to those hoping to make it big, and a shop that was known for housing the best musical instruments you could imagine. But sadly, in 2077, none of this actually exists. The building is a flat, blurry mess with absolutely zero physical detail, but if we were to clip inside this place, we can see that it's completely empty. At one specific point here, if the time of day is just right, we can witness an actual band playing, but the only sound in this place comes from these 2 guitar riffs. Otherwise, it's completely empty, and it makes it feel a bit like a school talent show. Metal Heaven isn't the only weird place up here though, because the rest of this courtyard is a confusing kit bash. There's a load of police tape and police equipment suggesting that a crime scene is taking place in this area, yet no law enforcement is seen anywhere. In fact, regular NPCs will spawn on these benches and look completely unbothered by the scenes around them. There's also 2 random market stalls placed crudely in front of Metal Heaven. One of them has these really aggressive lanterns which continuously blow around. The place is a mess, right? Like it's obvious that something went horrifically wrong here. But what's weird is that it's not even the unplayable parts where this last minute kind of taped together design can be seen, because even inside the game's boundaries, Crunch Plaza still proves that it's fundamentally unfinished. Like how we can witness a variety of small lifts scaling this skyscraper, which seems to be a truly unique piece of map design that I can't say I've seen anywhere else, and also allows for some really unique views if you were to clip inside. But then just next to this little nugget of intrigue, this poster boy for immersive world building, sits a billboard with a giant missing texture, just out in the open, flapping around. This isn't even outside the map, this is perfectly visible for anyone who happens to glance this way. 5 years on from release, by the way. Are you tired of living in your flesh prison? Tired of enduring the same meaningless existence every day? You need something strong, reliable, and exciting. That thing is War Thunder. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle game ever made, and is available right now for free on PC, consoles, and mobile devices. What's that? Your rent is due soon? That's a shame. Wouldn't you rather just command over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships across 10 major nations? You're short on eddies and can't buy food this week? Money comes and goes, but at least your 1920s biplanes and armoured cars are ready to be used. Your neighbour just couldn't take it anymore? That must be hard for you, but remember that you do have access to sick modern fighter jets and battle tanks. And because immersive combat, incredibly detailed vehicles, realistic graphics, and authentic sound effects are included, you probably won't even smell the odour from next door. If it's too pungent, why not delve into War Thunder's comprehensive customization system with countless camouflages, historical markings, and decorations for all types of vehicles? There's never been a better time to pretend like everything is fine. But Mr. Advertisement Man, I'm not always at my computer. Well, lucky for you, generic man, the new mobile version allows you to experience War Thunder's land, sea, and air combat anytime, anywhere. The mobile version features intuitive controls and impressive graphics, providing the familiar, massive multiplayer warfare that you've come to expect. I personally recommend War Thunder's incredible attention to detail. Vehicles and environments look absolutely incredible, and there's always something new to discover here. And as someone who isn't great at PvP games these days, I'm a little bit past my prime, it always helps to have pretty shiny things to look at. Make sure to sign up using my link in the pinned comment and the video description. Using my special link opens up a massive bonus pack for new and returning players who haven't played at least 6 months on PC and consoles. This bonus pack includes incredible rewards like multiple premium vehicles and even an exclusive vehicle decorator. There's also 100,000 silver lions and 7 days of premium account included, but it's only available for a limited time, so be quick. War Thunder's worldwide community of over 95 million players and its unrivaled wealth of high quality content ensures that this is a must-have experience for fans of military history. Play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox and mobile. What is actually going on with Dogtown's main entrance? This large and intimidating exterior is only really used for the opening of Phantom Liberty. Sure, you can fight your way through a small localized army, but you'll only end up reaching blocked off gates and unmovable turnstiles. So is there actually anything going on with this inaccessible entrance? The most obvious point of interest is this dark tunnel. It seems to be a pedestrian entrance, very similar to the usable one on the other side. It looks as grim as you'd expect, but it's also beautifully modelled. There isn't much going on here, but there is definitely more than I personally expected. These walkways do actually continue past the player's view, where the first one quickly hits these standard double doors that of course don't open. The furthest walkway, however, doesn't have these and instead ends more expectedly. However, there is still a nice amount of detail in between these staircases. We can also see that there's 2 vehicular entrances to Dogtown. Behind these closed off gates reveal mostly empty and dark spaces, although interestingly the 2 roads are accurately separated from one another with this unique see-through concrete structure, and on the right side we can even witness these road closed graphics. What's weird though is that these graphics are only visible from this roadside. I have no doubt that this is unintentional, since I'm pretty sure these gates exist elsewhere in Night City. But then when you look around this corner and notice this weird stack of crates, things become a little more uncertain. These crates have no purpose being here. They're not visible at all from both the playable exterior and also this pedestrian interior. They're only visible from this right side road and seem to block the player from going deeper out of bounds. The crates also have collision, so they truly are an effective barrier. But a barrier for what? For who? Especially since past these crates is the stadium's underbelly, which is mostly just a wide open space. Well, since we're already here, I guess we can look at the stadium underbelly. This space is very, very large and it's too expansive for this video, but I will show off these cool pockets of detail which can be found on this blank floor. What we're looking at is the opposite side of these pockets of light found inside the stadium's car park, although in free roam they don't seem to spawn in, so I don't know how this works. And the lighting also explodes when we fuck around too much doing this, so we'll probably have to come back and revisit this when we have a bit more time. Have you ever noticed that Japantown has a load of these distant buildings sitting on top of these skyscrapers? Most of these buildings are reserved for simple set dressing. Some of them are actually quite detailed with crispy texturing and working collision, whilst some of them barely exist, like this large rooftop compound which is mostly just one big texture. There's a couple of these staircases which would theoretically lead the player up and up, with some basic props placed throughout, like this classic Kyoto archway and also this little square fire pit. There's a very solid structure throughout, which could almost be seen as a kind of proof of concept or even a crude block out. There's many more examples which can be used to showcase Japantown's verticality, like this neighbouring rooftop near Mega Building H8, which for sure is just set dressing. But with that said, this place somehow manages to look surprisingly crispy whilst also looking looking like straight arse cheeks. Just behind Japantown is one of my personal favourite pieces of unused play space. This is a huge green pedestrian overpass that stretches over a massive stretch of motorway. By design, this thing should allow us to safely travel over this busy stretch of road, but in reality there is actually no tangible way to reach this spot. If we were to climb up here using no clip though, we can immediately tell that this isn't just set dressing, because throughout this whole bridge we have working collision, random litter dotted around, and even some additional verticality. There is undoubtedly some jank, like this little chunk of floor that's missing, and these functional double doors that lay behind this fat invisible wall, but I mean, it's all here, and it all makes quite a bit of sense. This isn't even the only example of a footbridge in Japantown that's completely off limits, because just off the motorway is another vertical footbridge. It's actually a bit of a maze exploring this spot, but we do get some really nice views of Night City and also a decent wedge of walking distance. On one end of this bridge is also a funny little unintentional or maybe intentional side effect, who knows, since this bridge suddenly ends on this little insignificant roof area which is also not accessible. This building's facade allows for some natural parkour that ends up connecting nicely to another closed off roof. This one has a fence which stretches around the perimeter, but other than that remains completely bare. You do have to wonder how much of this is unintentional and how much is possibly remnants of some abandoned idea, especially when it's almost too coincidental for all of these janky factors to form a fairly solid piece of gameplay. The absolute OG example of this, clearly abandoned verticality is this monorail track, because since basically day one, this section of train track has had these little glass meditation boxes sitting up here all alone. They're kept company by some generic storefronts, vending machines, and even little glass pedestrian walkways, but this is all completely inaccessible by the player. When we have genuinely unfinished verticality attached to something like the metro system, parkour, rooftops, and pedestrian footbridges aren't just baseless speculation fueled by some wishy-washy bullshit, they're an extension of what we already know is true. Anyway, to go back to this original bridge, there is some really interesting jank which I have to show you. Just past the game's playable boundaries, we can witness the end of this bridge, completing in a very odd environment. What we're looking at here is a classic Night City dead zone. There's a good few examples of these around Night City, like this N-Cart train line which blows through some skyscrapers, but what if I told you there's a single Night City dead zone that isn't unintentional, but rather half finished and hiding in plain sight? If you were to scale these tall fences on the motorway heading out of the Arasaka waterfront, you can eventually make your way onto this generic rooftop. If you push onwards past this hexagon, is that a word? If you push onwards past this big fucking hexagon, you can eventually stumble across a usable ladder. Following this ladder down will eventually lead you out onto this little courtyard. This entirely contained space is only filled with a couple generic planters, a few trash objects, and some lonely NPCs. These NPCs will only sit on the planter benches and constantly cycle through generic animations like eating or smoking. Their legs also don't touch the ground because these benches are slightly bigger than usual. But if you were to stay here long enough, like a weirdo in a public park's bush, you'll start to notice some really odd behavior going on. Sitting NPCs will never move from their benches. When they eventually try to get up and go for a wander, they either phase back into their sitting animation or despawn completely. However, this courtyard is actually only one part, because to the end of this rectangular courtyard sits a little tiny alley. This eventually takes us out into another large courtyard. Just like before, we have these random planters and benches scattered throughout this area in a very basic but overly symmetrical fashion. There is definitely a little more environmental design though, because one of these random corners has some piled crates, a skip filled with shit, and some crusty barrels taped together. This corner has the same appearance as the ladder location in the first spot, you know how we came down, so who knows, maybe this was also supposed to be some kind of player entrance. Further down the courtyard, we can find more NPCs spawning on benches and exhibiting the same Stockholm Syndrome behaviour as before. But what is instantly noticeable about this courtyard compared to the last are these massive blurry green walls. These instantly stick out like a sore thumb, since they are clearly not the same design nor quality as the other facades. And since we're so special, we can zoom out for just a second and see that these green walls are actually part of this big skyscraper's foundation. The building has just been placed on top of this pre-existing courtyard, but back on the ground we can instantly notice that we can pass through these walls with relative ease, revealing some more familiar looking exteriors just behind. But if we were to dig a little further and pass through these buildings, we can find something really quite unique. At first glance, this is just another large and empty dead zone, but hidden just out of sight in this perfectly square courtyard is a single parked vehicle. This little truck is politely waiting within this confined space, engine idling, hands at 10 to 2, with no real purpose or intentions. I initially thought that this had to be a mistake, you know, like a one-off glitch in NPC pathing or spawning, so I left the area, did a quick lap of Night City and came back again, only to find this guy was still waiting here as if I never left. Congress and MLK's metro station is an interior which was only added to Night City with the 2.1 update. It exists underneath the map between Memorial Park Station and this luminous overground track. But what's funny is that the train tunnel itself is actually a fully three-dimensional environment, just like the station itself. Trains will never freely travel along these underground tracks since the player is never meant to be down here, but when we get into the platform itself, we could easily imagine a world where the player is allowed to wander around these spaces. Because Congress is a beautifully detailed interior, there is no doubt about that. There's a few TVs blasting brain rot, functional vending machines spawning NPCs with basic pathing, some really nice texture work on these tiles which is extremely London Underground-esque, but sadly the longer we spend down here, the more this impression begins to shatter. Elements like these escalators, which usually seduce the mind with grand visions of multiple floors and interiors, reveal themselves to be mere props. Double doors hinting at maintenance tunnels and staff areas unveil themselves to be simple paintings. Congress, and unfortunately most of Cyberpunk's metro system, is really just an elaborate mask. Don't get me wrong, it's cool that trains are now functional in Cyberpunk, but I can't help but long for a lost version of this system, which seemed to be so much more dynamic and engaging, because there is actually a place left in Night City which still absolutely reeks of this long forgotten original functionality, a large point of interest called Memorial Park Station. Although 90% of this interior is actually explorable, the 10% that isn't is really cool. If we were to break past these metal detectors, we can explore a full underground platform that has existed in this way since the game's launch nearly 5 years ago. On one platform off in the far corner sits an empty lift shell. We can walk into this lift and have a little look around. It's definitely janky, there is absolutely zero lighting, and the lift itself doesn't really marry up with the station's structure. And to make matters even more interesting, this logic only applies to one platform, because if we check out the other platform, tucked away in this dark corner is a little empty cutout where a lift should be. There are NPCs which spawn way past the viewable area, all the way down in these completely dark parts of the platform. The tube tracks only actually exist when connecting Memorial Park to Congress and MLK, because all the other tracks simply hit these tunnel walls and cease to exist. The platform also has this nice glass detailing on the floor, which allows us to see below and into this kind of maintenance shaft. This is yet another entirely inaccessible space, but through NoClip we can actually walk around here freely and even clamber on some of these pipes as if it was completely intentional. Since we're down here as well, we can also spy another set of gates floating just below the usable ones. These actually exist below every single gate across this entire station, and it's worth pointing out that these aren't even NCART gates. These are just generic metal detectors which are used throughout Night City. If we run with the idea that Memorial Park was probably built around Cyberpunk's original NCART functionality, allowing for complete player freedom, then it seems likely that these old metal detectors were probably the original method of entering stations. And considering that these models just let the player walk through without any sort of load screens or transitions, it does seem that this was what the developers originally wanted to implement. It could also explain why Memorial Park's platform has its own unique ambience. Distant sound effects like trains pulling their brakes echo throughout this station alongside a surprisingly eerie track. It doesn't sound as if you're in the midst of a bustling train station like Memorial Park is presented to be. It instead feels lonely. It feels isolated and unnatural. I can't help but feel mildly uncomfortable walking around here, but I'd love to know what you guys think, because, you know, this place has always stood out to me as being particularly unique. Do you think that more was planned for this platform, or is this just excellent world building? The final thing which I want to point out about Memorial Park Station before my brain explodes into 1,000 mushy pieces is this big metal gate. There's a little sign above pointing us to descending stairs, but these stairs do actually exist, although they aren't exactly helpful as they end quite abruptly in this dark room, and this entire dark room is devoid of any real substance other than cold hard concrete, but you know, they're here for some reason. On the other side of the station there is also another identical metal gate with the same identical descending stair sign thing, except behind this gate the stairs actually continue a little further and even end up curving to the right before again ending abruptly. This curvy staircase even ends on the same level as this maintenance tunnel which we explored earlier. It's almost like it was on the same floor and the floor doesn't exist anymore. Memorial Park Station is just such a fascinating location because it truly is like looking at a whole other version of Cyberpunk. Memorial Park is physical proof that this game could have easily done with another few years of development. And the beauty of NCART, unused verticality, unfinished courtyards, and middle finger monuments is that you're always walking through history. You may not always be paying attention, but sometimes it doesn't give you much choice. We've still only scratched the surface of this stuff. Like, I actually had to cut stuff out of this video. The irony. Let me know if a part 3 is something which you're interested in. And as always guys, if you made it to the end of this video, comment Pepsi Max Cherry down below, because I'm actually sipping on one right now and it's very tasty. Thank you again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to play it for free on PC PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile by using my links in the pinned comment and the video description. And remember, new and returning players that haven't played in 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across PC and consoles. But as always, it's only for a limited time, so you gotta be quick. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, I'll catch you lot in a bit.